Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. My guest for the next 4 episodes is Alan Brill. Alan is Senior Managing Director, Cyber Risk at Kroll, a corporate services firm specializing in valuations, cyber risk, corporate finance, and regulatory compliance, among other services. Alan founded the firm's high-tech investigations practice. He's also a frequent writer, speaker, and instructor on cyber and technology security and has appeared on a variety of media outlets, including 60 Minutes, Dateline NBC, Good Morning America, and CNN. Over the course of the next 4 episodes, sponsored by Springer Nature, Alan and I will be discussing the state of cybersecurity in higher education, particularly the risk facing colleges and universities and their libraries, faculty, students, and administrators. We'll also be looking at opportunities for libraries to cooperate with other groups across the campus in a collective defense against digital intruders. In this first episode, Alan defines cybersecurity, its scope, and how it's evolved over the years. We'll also begin to look at some of the practical approaches individuals and institutions can take to protect themselves. Okay, Alan Brill, welcome to the program. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
All right. So we've all heard of the ransomware attacks on the Colonial Pipeline, for example, and the pace of cyber attacks and hacking is certainly ramping up, or has been for a while. A recent statistic I heard is that a ransomware attack occurs every 8 minutes, according to one security firm. But I wonder if you can explain what cybersecurity is in your view. How do these stories we hear in the news relate to what's happening across the country and perhaps even in higher ed in particular?
Well, look, cybersecurity really is everything you do to protect your information resources,
Hmm.
whether those resources are on a laptop, on a tablet, on a smartphone, on a computer network. And it is a combination of both high and low tech means of avoiding problems. It is a basic requirement for all systems. And the thing that makes it difficult is that we live, as everybody knows, in an increasingly interconnected world. So if you go back to 30 years ago, libraries, when they were automating, weren't all that connected to the rest of the university. They were semi-autonomous. They used systems that just worked in the library setting. But now everything is interconnected. So students can reach the library through the university network.
Hmm.
The library can reach out to students, to faculty, to staff, to other libraries, all through a network. So the isolation that was really part of the security, in large part, has vanished.
Hmm.
So the issues that we face in securing this part of cyberspace that's our responsibility has really become more intensive because you're always trying to figure out who's out there and whether they have the right to do what they want to do or that you think they should be able to do. And
Hmm.
it's that dynamic that is at the heart of many, probably most, of the cybersecurity incidents that our team at Kroll sees every day.
Right. You mentioned cybersecurity involves high and low tech methods, but I'm wondering if there are any rules of thumb. Of course, there are, but that pretty much anyone can apply to make themselves and their workplaces less vulnerable. I mean, we'll get into more of this, but in general terms, what are some of the broad-based applications that folks can pursue?
I think if I had to choose one
Hmm.
rule of thumb, it would be one that's probably as old as time, and that is trust but verify.
Yeah.
You can't go through life thinking that everybody is a bad guy and out to get you. But at the same time, you can't assume that everybody is who and what they say.
Mm.
And if you just think about your home telephone and all those calls that you get offering you such exciting opportunities as long term insurance for your car, new and better forms of cable television, the fact that the Internal Revenue Department, whatever that is going to arrest you. If you look at the caller ID, you'll see that sometimes it has what appears to be an official designation, but is often just some local number that they're using and spoofing.
Hmm.
And it's really part of awareness of security. So when the phone rings and I look at it and it's some local person's name and number, and it turns out it's, somebody trying to sell something, first thing I ask is, "Hey, I'd love to speak to you, but exactly what's on my caller ID?" And typically that gets them to hang up instantaneously.
Right.
But it's that simple.
Yep.
Does somebody who says, "Hey, Sam sent me, he works with you. He said you would help me to get this access." You might want to take a second and call that person to make sure that that's real.
Hmm.
And if it is, they can thank you, you can thank them. But if it isn't, you know. So trust but verify is really the first key. The second key is that if your senior management wants to know who the next potential victim of a cyber attack is, the easiest thing and the most realistic thing you can tell them is look in the mirror, because there is no way that an organization is immune from this.
Hmm.
What that means is we need to take it seriously. And we need to take it seriously as an organization, as a university, so that we know who's attached. We know what they're able and not able to do. And we know how we can isolate them from the things that they're not entitled to get, to see, to access.
Right.
I think that's kind of the primer.
Hmm. So, building on that a little bit, your work at Kroll, the global consulting firm, takes a unique interspersed approach to risk management. Instead of seeing it as sort of buying insurance, so to speak, the task is a much more organization wide effort. And you mentioned the importance of awareness. Can you talk more about that? What is the danger of siloing risk management into one department, for example?
If the risk was focused in one department, it would make sense to silo it.
Hmm.
But the truth is, it isn't. The truth is, the risk is across the organization. And what that means is a couple of things. Number one, it means that every part of the organization has to have an awareness of security. And number two, that there's not one center of smartness about this.
Right.
You need to think in terms of what the legal requirements are, not just something like FERPA, but do you have a healthcare operation on the campus? Are they able to follow the rules for HIPAA? You may have a bookstore, you may have the bursar accepting credit and debit card payments. Are they following the payment card industry standards? So, understanding the legal regulation and contractual requirements is something that often the general counsel of the university may be involved in. You want to make sure that whatever you're doing is working, that you're doing it right, and that you're doing it for real. And that's somewhere where a compliance officer can be heavily involved. You want to know that if something happens, you have the personnel rules in place to enable you to enforce your rules. And that can be the HR person. So when you start to bring together the pieces of the puzzle, you start to gain a strength that you wouldn't have if you siloed everything. You can't simply say cybersecurity. Cyber is the first part of that. Oh, yeah, that's the IT department. They're in charge.
Yeah.
And absolutely, they have a central and vital role, but they're not alone. Just as I can try to make you believe that a fake call is coming from the IRS, they try to do the same thing. And so each of us, as it turns out, and particularly those for whom information is at the center of their work, like the library, has to take the responsibility for securing their parts of the system and to be an active participant in the overall cybersecurity picture, not to make things incredibly difficult so that you can't get your job done,
Hmm.
but simultaneously not so open that you lose security.
Okay. So our primary audience is academic librarians who are listening to this. How do you see the expertise of librarians intersecting with the broader campus's needs for cybersecurity?
It's very interesting. I spent a few years writing a multi volume, weekly updated service on cybersecurity. And my co author was the head of the libraries at a major East Coast law school.
Hmm.
And it turned out that it gave me the chance to see how influential a good library executive could be and really should be. What we recognized there was that as the center of information, the library was often very connected within the campus. But at the same time, there was this feeling that the library was kind of, well, it's a place that people go to study and it's not all that really important. And that left the gap.
Hmm.
And that gap was a place where a hacker can get into a university's network and cause disruptions.
Hmm.
So we see the library as both a center of knowledge and potentially a center for protecting not just the library's assets and the assets that they license under all the agreements that everybody makes, but also really having an influence on how the university as a whole is able to protect its cyber resources.
Hmm. So then, how do you see the library and say that the IT and its collaboration with IT and risk officers? Why is that relationship so crucial?
It really is the case that when you look at how you operationalize cybersecurity, that there's a deep intertwining between the elements. So the library knows the information that it wants. It understands how that information should be appropriately distributed. And it has to rely on the IT department to provide the means of carrying that out. So, for example, the the library may say, "Look, only people with a certain background, a certain need to know, should have access to a given resource." But it may be back to the IT department to both authenticate who is out there and to determine what their characteristics are so that it can pass along to the library enough information for the library systems to make the decision on whether to grant or deny access to specific parts of the library. It's very much a means of and a method for granularization, that is, giving people access to what they are entitled to. And, it was only in the past week that this became even more important. The Supreme Court ruled in a case called Van Buren that the federal computer crime statute, which had been used when somebody exceeded their authorized use of data, couldn't be used for that anymore. In this case, a police officer, I think in Georgia, accepted a bribe to look up the owner of a license plate. And he had access to the license plate database for his day-to-day work as a police officer. But the lower courts had said, well, you exceeded that. You weren't supposed to take a bribe and sell the information. And the Supreme Court said, well, that's not how we read the law. What we read the law to say is if you have access, you cannot use this particular federal law to criminalize the way that you use it, even if it's something as gross as you're selling the information, you're stealing the information. So it's another reason to think about who we give access to, how much access we give them, and how we know that it's really them when they come into our system.
You just heard from Alan Brill. Alan is Senior Managing Director, Cyber Risk at Kroll, a corporate services firm specializing in valuations, cyber risk, corporate finance, and regulatory compliance, among other services. Alan founded the firm's high-tech investigations practice. This episode is sponsored by Springer Nature. Join us next week as we explain why higher education has become a favorite target for espionage, who the foreign actors are, and what a zero-day attack is.
We all wish that a software manufacturer knew everything that could go wrong with their software. But the reality is that's not happening. Many of the products that we use, operating systems, database systems, learning management systems in a university environment, are so large that there may be millions of lines of code. And those are getting updated in real time or near real time as things change, as requirements change. So it turns out that there's a non-zero possibility that there is a security weakness in software. If the bad guys discover that before the good guys, they can exploit it.
If you like what you hear, rate us or give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced by Choice's senior digital media producer, Mark Dirks, and digital media assistant, Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.